Hey guys, how's it going? Jay Sensational here, welcome back to the channel. Today is going to be one of the discussion videos that I had wanted to be making if you guys saw the earlier announcement I made on the channel. Today we're going to be talking about Mono Shurima, everything I dislike about it, everything I do like about it, because there are aspects of the deck that I do enjoy, and I do think it's a really cool concept, but the way that we get there is definitely a little bit awkward, and I want to make this video to talk about it and discuss with you guys, because I know Mono Shurima will be getting hit in the upcoming patch coming, I believe, this Wednesday. So I wanted to project a few of my hopes just for the deck, because I don't want to see it just get completely wiped out like it has been in the past, but I would like to see it different in some aspect, and maybe I can get your guys' opinion on what you guys think about the deck. Do you guys like it? Do you guys hate it? What aspects do you like? What aspects do you not like? And etc. So that's going to be the plan for today. So just sit back and let's talk about Mono Shurima. Alright, so just to start off, I'll give a brief overview of Mono Shurima, what it does, and how it really got here. I think for a lot of you guys, even if you guys aren't following along too much with how the meta goes, Mono Shurima is probably a deck that you've at least played in the past, and fundamentally what Mono Shurima has been doing or has done in the past is still pretty much the same. It's gone through very few iterations, relatively speaking, and I think the core deck is still very closely the same, and it still has the same outcome no matter how fast it is nowadays. The core of the deck is built around the Sundisc card. This is the payoff of playing a mono deck. Now, there's other like mono decks that are allegiance decks, which just have like a 3-card splash, things like that. No, this is a 40-card Shuriman deck, and the benefit of it is that you get to summon the buried Sundisc out at the start of your game, which has a countdown 25, and then it gets to the Sundisc proc, and then it ascends your champions. Now, in the past, this used to not summon out directly, but you drew it at the start of the game, and now you get it out, you don't have to spend the 1 mana, and you can play like an Ancient Prep or a 1-drop or something like that. So that change was probably the first change that happened to Mono Shurima. So instead of start of game, summon one of me from your deck, it was draw me if you don't have me in your hand. Actually, I'm not sure. I think it would always draw 1 copy, regardless of what you had in your hand, or maybe you just couldn't mulligan it in your hand, which I think would also make sense. Oops, sorry. But now, once the Buried Sundisc summoned out of deck, it became a little bit better, right? Because now you could play a 1-drop on turn 1, and now you wouldn't lose that tempo of playing Buried Sundisc out on turn 1. Now, as we progressed, the deck was still pretty bad. It was still very slow. You had to play like Ascended's Rise or something like that in order to get it off consistently at an early stage. But as we progressed with the most recent patch, that really buffed up Mono Shurima. I think the change that was definitely the most impactful was Azir now counting landmarks towards his level up condition. In the past, you needed 13 plus allies, and this is what made the deck slow, because now you're very dependent on how fast you can level up Azir, and maybe you level it up between like turns 7 and 8, and then you just had to stall until you got there. So Azir now counting landmarks fundamentally just really speeds up how Azir levels up. Fundamentally with cards like Rock Copper counting as 2 units, Ancient Hourglass even counting as 2 units, Ancient Prep counting as 2 units, Endless Devout counting as 3 units, technically, once you destroy the Sarcophagus and summon the Devout, which now Azir just levels up phenomenally faster, and now you consistently get the Sundisc finished on turns 6, 7. And because you're doing that so much faster, you're getting to the win con of the deck. Once you get to the Sundisc and you play and you have an Azir on board and Azir ascends, you suddenly get access to the Emperor's deck. But in most cases, it's really just Ascended Azir or Xerath that just really takes the cake in most games with this deck. His effect is actually quite ridiculous. When an allied landmark is destroyed around start, deal 5 to the weakest enemy or the enemy nexus if there are none. If an enemy unit would die, obliterate instead. This last clause is a little bit less impactful. Now there are just like these very niche cases where that's very relevant. But the fact that Xerath will deal 5 damage to an enemy or the Nexus at the round start, as well as when allied landmarks is destroyed, along with its kind of ridiculous 4-mana 5/9 stat line, along with the fact that you actually get to draw another copy of your Xerath and Azir when you flip the Sundisc, makes this card just so insane at closing out the game. And once you flip the Sundisc, Xerath will just carry you to the finish line. That's just like the general gist of the deck. And now I want to take a moment to talk about what I do like about the deck and maybe what I don't like. And then I will talk about the direction that I would honestly like to see Riot take for this deck. So let's first start with the Emperor's deck. This is, again, the deck that you get access to when you flip the Sundisc and you have an Azir in play. Once Azir ascends to level 3, he replaces your existing deck with a 15 deck card count deck of the Ascended or Mono Shurima deck, whatever you want to call it, the Emperor's deck. And now what I really like about this sort of Emperor's deck, or this just general like strategy or like mechanic that the Sundisc has, is that unlike the other sort of landmark projected alternate win conditions, this one doesn't end the game on the spot. If you think about something like Star Spring or the Bandle Tree, they're two landmark-oriented win conditions that you build your deck around and work towards, but once you get there, you just win the game on the spot. And to me, I don't really like that style of alternate win condition, and that's what I really like about the Sundisc. The Sundisc has a goal that you want to achieve, right? It's the same thing across all the different landmarks, but instead of winning the game when it's fully fulfilled, you get access to this deck, this pile of cards that, you know, don't exist outside of this deck and are fundamentally powerful in what they do that allow you to win the game. Once you get to the Emperor's deck, it's very, very difficult for any other deck to really even compete, regardless of even if you have the champions. I think the only time I've beaten an Emperor's deck is through like a leveled up Asol kind of thing. So just the general power level of this deck, to put that in a frame of perspective, is super, super powerful. You just have very overstated cards, things like Emperor's Guard, a 2-mana 5/4 Fearsome when summon, draw a card. Like, that's kind of cracked. Other things like, you know, Burst Speed, draw 2, Pot of Greed, Shimmering Mirage, also really interesting card, you know, summoning exact copy of an ally at burst speed when all of your deck are already just very, very big. Some very strong tempo plays like Golden Herald that just summons 3 units for 1 and has this effect at round start as well. Eternal Gladiator for this sort of removal at the end of each round. General's Palace, just this really interesting landmark that propels the pressure that you're able to apply on your opponent, especially in conjunction with like Golden Herald. And then most importantly, the last card in your deck is Ascended's Call, which summons Renekton and Nasus, immediately levels them to level 3 and rallies. So like the point of the Emperor's deck is not only does it provide a stronger deck than your opponent because you've done so much, you've built your deck in a certain way, you've completed the Sundisc's requirement, and now you're rewarded with a deck that will beat down your opponent over the course of the next couple of turns. And now if that doesn't work, your last card that you can dig for is Ascended's Call, which, you know, summons a 10/10 Renekton Overwhelm, and then a Nasus Fearsome with Spell Shield that also just diminishes your opponent's blockers. And rallies is almost a surefire way to end the game. So regardless of the situation you're in, if you can stall enough and fulfill your condition for the Sundisc, you are rewarded with a deck that is still interactable. Like this deck applies pressure completely through the board. There's no burn in this deck. There's no elusives. The only thing is fearsomes, really, and except for like Ascended's Call with Overwhelm and things like that. But you can interact with every piece of this card deck, you know, on board, with removal and other things like that. Unlike, you know, like Fiora perhaps. Well, of course you can kill Fiora, but you can't really stop it once she wins the game. You can't really stop the Bandle Tree, you can't really stop the Star Spring outside of removing them or resetting them. Which, you know, with this deck, sure you can reset Sundisc, but that once Sundisc has ticked down, you get access to a deck that I think is really, really cool. And obviously powerful for its price in both deck building and game plan. Now, the area where we can begin talking about where I dislike about the deck is sort of just, it's sort of tied to Sundisc, but it's, I'll talk about it in terms of Sundisc first, and then I'll extrapolate it to the other problem cards. So first of all, there's Buried Sundisc, the countdown 25, restore the Sundisc, and when an Ascended ally levels up, advance me 10 rounds. So essentially what this card says is when you level up 2 Ascended allies, so you level up 2 different champions, you finish the Sundisc. And generally speaking, I don't think that's a particularly bad problem. I think it's really cool because it, it wants you to build with this ascended champion sort of strategy. And of course, when you get there, you get level 3 as champions, which again, I think is a super cool concept. The issue is that the champions that you put in your deck in order to fulfill this win condition are just super lame and interactive. So starting with Azir, right? It's you summon 13 plus allies or landmarks. You can level him in hand. Like you play Ancient Prep into Rock Hopper into like Roiling Sands, and then all of a sudden you're like halfway through your level up, and you're like, cool, I'll just play him down when he's leveled up. For the same reason that I think Azir is pretty lame in his contributions towards the Sundisc, I think Xerath is also fitting in the similar position, where he levels up when you've destroyed 4 plus allied landmarks this game. So if you play an Ancient Prep on turn 1, and then you play Rock Hopper and Roiling Sands on turns 2 and 3, and your opponent plays 3 units into your Roiling Sands, all of a sudden Xerath is leveled. And they're like, oh, okay, I guess they level up their Sundisc. And then, Xerath levels and then he becomes a pain in the ass. But the idea of being able to progress your Sundisc in a way that your opponent has no real way of stopping, because you can't stop the level up when you play out the champion and it's already fulfilled its level of requirement. You just can't do anything about it, and then you're just looking there looking like, oh well, I guess I couldn't really interact with that. And that puts you in a weird spot, because then you're very limited in how you can actually play against a deck like Mono Shurima. As you've seen, a lot of the different strategies that try to aim on beating Mono Shurima include a lot of these burn strategies, these go wide strategies, these elusive strategies. And this just creates, very polarizing games where Mono Shurima either just completely dumps on you because you have no interaction for the Sundisc and you have no interaction for the champions, or the fact that you just can't play the game because, you're just playing like this bad deck, and then your opponent just like steamrolls you, or you can't really interact. And they're just going to like check you. Do you have a quicksand? Do you have a deny? And things like that. The second aspect is, I think Shurima as a region has been getting some really insane tools that make it like very, very good into pretty much any sort of deck. The Soothsayer giving giving landmark spell shield. I think that landmark removal, and giving spell shields to landmarks, that could be like a discussion for a completely separate topic. But the fact that landmark removal is already very expensive, you get the Sundisc for free, and you need to destroy it. Otherwise, your opponent plays Soothsayer, and then suddenly you need 2 landmark destruction cards to destroy it, and now you're just really down mana, even if you're able to destroy the Sundisc. Of course, even if you do have a landmark destruction card, but your opponent runs Rite of Negations and is able to stop that, and you're like, oh, okay, that's the only card I drew. I guess I guess their Sundisc lives. There's very little interaction against the Sundisc, and even if you have it, Shurima has Deny in the region, which I still really don't understand why they have Rite of Negation within their region. It doesn't really make sense to me. I don't get it. And it just propels this deck in a way that I think just isn't really fair, honestly. And then, of course, the last card that the deck has gone is Quicksand, which is honestly probably the strongest defensive card in the game right now, because this will just completely stop attacks by itself. Your mid-range opponent can't get like their overwhelms through. You disable elusives, you get rid of like Scouts, Challenger, things like that. It's just so interactive that it becomes uninteractive for your opponent. And it's really just, did I draw Quicksand to have a card to stop their attack turn, or did I not and I lose? Which not only makes the games more polarizing, but it also makes, games where you do draw Quicksand just a complete joke, and then all of a sudden your unfavorables aren't even that bad at all. So definitely, now you have to play decks that don't lose to Quicksand, but also beat up Mono Shurima, and those are limited to much fewer sort of burn and go wide strategies. But then, do they have Rite of Negation? And it's again, you're just checking them if they have Quicksand, if they have Rite of Negation on these really key turns that you either need to play burn or play Yordle Arms or play like your elusive ambushes and things like that. So the fact that Mono Shurima has such good interaction tools against all different sorts of strategies, and of course they have Rite of Arcane, which is just a 3-mana deal 4, why not? Which you can use on Endless Avowal, which summons you 5/3, why not? It's just such powerful synergy for a deck, while also ticking towards what your deck really wants to be doing, right? So I think fundamentally this deck, the region, also has a lot of different tools against any sort of deck that tries to interact with it or tries to beat it, and then the decks that just can't interact with the game plan, just which is pretty much all of them, just really fail to. And of course, I want to talk about Ancient Hourglass as well. Even if you try to challenge your opponent's champions, even if you try to vengeance them before they're leveled, which, you know, you might get like a level 1 Xerath plop down on the board on like 3 out of 4, and you try to vengeance it, but they pay 2 mana to Ancient Hourglass it, and then suddenly they're gaining 1 proc for Xerath and then 2 procs for Azir. Like, this card is just so synergistic for what the deck wants to be doing. It's so insane for its mana cost. And I think this is the third deck that really makes and breaks this kind of deck, and just makes it really, really uninteractive. So those are the 3 cards that I think are a huge problem within this deck. If you change like 2 or 3 of them, or even just like 1 of them, the deck would be hit quite heavily, because these are really key cards for it, right? If you hit Quicksand, suddenly the ambush decks get through. If you hit Hourglass, suddenly now you have to not play your champions unleveled, I guess, which doesn't really solve the problem, except now you have to play a little bit more carefully. And if you hit Rite Negation, sort of same situation. Like, even if you hit all 3 of these cards, this doesn't change the fundamental aspect as to why this deck, I think, is both polarizing and sort of toxic to play against, because Azir and Xerath levels up in hand, and there's no reason to play them pre-level up. And then, of course, then there's no real way to interact with the Sundisc outside of trying to destroy it, but then Soothsayer plus Rite Negation makes that very, very difficult. This is where I think the meat of the discussion is. This is where I think I would want to see the deck being changed in a way, or to see, you know, some change to how the deck plays that I think would make Mono Shurima a more healthy sort of play pattern. But maybe some of these concepts aren't really like very solid, or it's not really something that I can think about how to achieve in game yet. But I just want to discuss it with you guys because I think this is an important aspect of the deck, and I really hope that their solution or their nerf, because as I mentioned previously in the beginning, they are nerfing this deck, or at least I believe they are changing it in some aspect. I really don't want to see this deck being completely gutted into the point where it's not playable, because I do think it is a very cool concept that, you know, we don't see with any other deck within the game, such as the Emperor's deck. So let's address the main issue, which is Azir and Xerath leveling up in hand, and then suddenly you don't need to play them until they are leveled up. So there's 2 different ways we can address that. The first one is we can change Sundisc, so it has some different sort of condition when you play out your champions leveled up. Maybe it's like, so instead of like advancing them down for 10 rounds, maybe it's like 5 or something, and then when you have a level 2 champion on board, you count down faster or something like that. So you need to have your champions on board in order to level up your Sundisc faster, so you're more inclined to play them out early on, and then you also have to play a little bit of a longer game in order to get there. So I feel like we need to incentivize the people playing Sundisc to play out their champions and have them in a vulnerable spot where if they are killed, they slow down your game plan. Which right now, if they're killed, they don't slow down your game plan at all, besides needing to replay them. So something like, you know, just when you have a leveled Azir and Xerath on board, you count down 4 each round. If you only have 1 of them, you count down like 2 each round, and then it sort of multiplies, maybe just like by 1, you know. So if you have a leveled Azir, it counts down by 2. With the leveled Xerath, it counts down by 3. And then if you have like a level Renekton, Nasus, or, you know, if you actually get there, it's like 4 and 5. So at the more level 2 champions you have on board, the faster the Sundisc counts down. And now you're both incentivized and inclined to have level champions down on board. And now, of course, you still have cards like Hourglass and Quicksand and Soothsayer to protect your champions. So even in the worst case, you still have very good ways of preventing your opponent from killing them. But at the very least, it's going to slow down how fast you get to your Sundisc, and it's going to slow down the your game plan overall. So that's one way to do it. The other way, of course, is changing how Azir and Xerath level up conditions work. Maybe change them to you've seen in some aspect. You know, you've seen X amount of allied landmarks destroyed this round, you've seen allied summoned or landmark summoned. The issue with this is going to change how these champions work in other decks, and that's always just a weird discussion because I don't really know like what's fair, right? Like Azir is so good in like Azir Relia still, and it's really conditional on a leveled Azir, and then suddenly if Azir is like seen in that deck, then suddenly, you know, you're just butchering that deck at the cost of Mono Shurima. Same with Xerath, although Xerath right now is definitely a little bit less tied into other sort of decks, but for the same reason. The other way is have a incentive for the player to introduce a third or fourth ascended champion into their deck. Right now, Mono Shurima is completely locked behind Azir and Xerath. I've seen some experimentation with like Zilean, but Zilean doesn't need to level up, right? You don't need to level up any other champion besides Azir and Xerath. And I think that's sort of contributing to the problem of Sundisc. If you had in like a different scenario where you had to level up Renekton and Nasus instead of Azir and Xerath, then suddenly that completely changes how the opponent can play into the game, right? Because Renekton levels up by dealing damage, and that's completely interactive. You can stun him, you can kill him, you can kill the blocker that's blocking him. Now, of course, he has Overwhelm, so it doesn't really matter, but you have so many different ways of interacting with Renekton and Nasus for that reason that suddenly your opponent has to have a strategy that isn't I level up my champions in hand and then I play them when they're leveled up. It's I have to play Renekton, I have to keep him alive, and I have to work towards leveling him up. Now this is going to be a lot more difficult because now you're allowing your uninteractive deck to be interacted with, and then there has to be some sort of conditions I get back. So maybe it's easier to level up Sundisc or something like that, or maybe it's easier to level up Renekton or Nasus. But then again, you get into a problem where that's going to make the other decks that play those champions even better at the cost of Mono Shurima. So it's kind of in this weird spot where the 4 ascended champions right now just can't really be budged. You can't like make them easy, you can't make them hard to level up because this is just going to affect the other decks that they're being played in at the cost of trying to nerf a deck that, while is problematic, you can like gut it in some other way that doesn't affect the champions. My second problem with Mono Shurima is Ascended Xerath. I think Ascended Xerath does too much for what he does. He's too powerful, and Sundisc draws him guaranteed, and then Xerath plus Rite of Arcane just kills like 2 more things, and then he just steamrolls the game. I think Ascended Xerath needs a nerf. If they only change one card within Mono Shurima, I hope that they change Ascended Xerath, because I think this card is broken. So broken to the point that I think this takes away completely from the strategy of having, or of the upside of gaining the Emperor's deck. Because while, you may get to play like 1 or 2 Emperor's deck cards, Xerath are just going to win you the game before then, and then, the Emperor's deck card just gives you like an extra 5 attack body to get through it and damage your opponent. Xerath completely just deflates the value of having an Emperor's deck. Even if you don't have the Emperor's deck because you don't have an Azir in play when you flip the Sundisc, you're still going to win because Ascended Xerath is just going to take away the game for you. So you could play a Sundisc deck that doesn't need Azir, and you're completely fine because of how powerful Xerath is in gaining back tempo, gaining back control, and just being a fat blocker, like a 9 health blocker at 4. Like, I don't understand the balancing. Like, change this to like a 6, change how much damage it deals, change its condition. I don't get why round start it deals this. Like, it's too powerful for what it does, and then it has this weird obliterate thing that actually does affect certain decks. Like, Anivia gets affected by this, some decks with strike things get affected by this. It's so weird that it's conditionally just like slapped onto Xerath for very little reason. I don't understand why. I just don't really like the design of this card. I think it's too powerful for what it does, and I think it's too, and it detracts from the whole point, or the whole cool aspect of Mono Shurima and the Sundisc, which is, you get the Emperor's deck. So Xerath, I would like to see a change as well. And I think the last change that is the easiest one to make is just making Sundisc like a higher countdown, right? right now how this countdown works is you get 20 countdown from your champions, and then by round 6 you'll have it counted down, right? I guess it's actually round 5. Is it round 5? No, it's round 6. So by round 6 you have it counted down. So for each countdown that you up the Sundisc by, you're going to slow it down by 1 round. So if it's at 26, it's round 7. If it's 28, it's or 27, it's round 8, right? If you put it to 27, suddenly your opponent has to maybe play a few different cards. Maybe it's like they could play like the Hourglass in a Bottle card. They could play like the actual countdown cards within Shurima that affect like the landmarks, like the clockwork mechanic or whatever it's called. And in order to like, you know, complete their sort of ascension at the right time. So maybe they have to play one, or they have to find 1 or 2 extra cards, or they're slowed down by a couple rounds, which does slow down, you know, it's going to, if the difference between them flipping Xerath on turn like 8 versus like turn 6 is huge, right? Because again, Ascended Xerath is the problem within the deck. It's a big blocker for its cost, and it does too much. So like having Ascended Xerath, you know, having these Ascended Xerath get ascended later is going to slow down the power swing of this whole deck. Now again, I think this is a really poor sort of fix, because again, it doesn't fundamentally fix what I think is bad with the deck. And it sort of just like slaps a band-aid on it and say, okay, now I hope that the meta is fast enough so that it beats up this deck, and then this deck doesn't see play. That doesn't change how, you know, it is like, you know, the matchup against like the decks that try to interact with this deck outside of beating it down, which I think I would like to see in some aspect. And I don't want it to be, you have to beat this deck down, otherwise you still lose. And I hope that would be the case. So that's kind of just my thoughts on the deck. You know, I think there's still some problem cards like Hourglass, Quicksand, and Ride of Nation within the regions. But if there's a better way to interact with your opponent's champions as well as the progress towards a Sundisc, then they'll have to have more resources. And then as the game drags on, they'll have to have more cards and more stall in order to like stay alive before they flip their Sundisc. So whether that be to need or to incentivize the Mono Shurima player to have their champions on board while they're progressing their Sundisc, making it overall slower, or changing how the champions work so that you can level them, you're needing to play them before you can level them up, would all be like very good ways to approach this deck. I really don't want to see them just gutting this away, because I do think this concept is cool, and I'm really excited to see what comes out of the rework coming this Wednesday, alongside all the other stuff like the champions and things like that, because I think that will be really interesting. And maybe, you know, like the new decks that'll come out of all the buff champions will in some way affect, you know, like how good Mono Shurima is. And then maybe, while I don't think this is true, maybe then Mono Shurima won't need as many nerfs, but I do think Mono Shurima is still very problematic at the moment and doesn't really have many blind spots in the deck. And that's just sort of the general summary of how I would want to approach this deck to change it. So let me know what you guys think. Do you guys agree with my general statements and sentiment, or do you guys have like different ideas that you would love to share? Please do leave your comments down below, and I'll be sure to read them, and then we can take that into account when we see the changes on Wednesday. So thank you guys so much for tuning into the video. Hope to see you guys tomorrow for another one. I believe should be the patch notes coming out, actually. So that should be really exciting. So I'll see you guys tomorrow. Please take care and have a good day. So peace out, guys, and take care.